David wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed down from the scaffolding. Another 12-hour day at the construction site was finally over, but his body felt like it had been hit by a truck. At 34 years old, he shouldn't feel this tired, but these days every muscle in his body ached by evening. The other workers were already heading to their cars, laughing and making plans for the weekend. David envied them. He couldn't remember the last time he had made plans that didn't involve figuring out how to pay a bill. He walked slowly to his beat-up pickup truck, the one with the dent on the passenger side that he couldn't afford to fix. The paint was peeling and the engine made weird noises, but it still ran. That was all that mattered these days. As long as it could get him to work and back home to his 8-year-old daughter Lily, he didn't care what it looked like. 6 months ago, his life had been completely different. He had a wife, a decent apartment, and enough money to occasionally take Lily out for ice cream without checking his bank account first. Then Rachel decided she wanted a different life. She said she couldn't handle being a mother anymore, that she felt trapped, that she needed to find herself. One Tuesday morning, David woke up to find a note on the kitchen table and half their savings account emptied. Rachel was gone, and suddenly he was a single father with no warning and no preparation. The first month was the hardest. Lily kept asking when Mommy was coming home, and David didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love? He tried to keep things normal, but normal was expensive. The rent on their 2-bedroom apartment ate up most of his paycheck. Then there was food, utilities, Lily's school supplies, and the babysitter he needed when he worked late shifts. By month 3, David realized he was drowning. The babysitter cost almost as much as he made in overtime. He had to choose between paying her or buying groceries. He started bringing Lily to job sites when school was out, making her promise to stay in the truck with her coloring books and snacks. The site supervisor wasn't happy about it, but David was one of their best workers, so they looked the other way. The real wake-up call came when David got the eviction notice. 3 months behind on rent, and the landlord was done being patient. David had begged for more time, explaining his situation, but business was business. He had 30 days to come up with $2,000 or find somewhere else to live. With his credit ruined and no savings, finding another apartment was impossible. That's when David made the decision that changed everything. He and Lily moved into his truck. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary, he told himself, just until he could get back on his feet. He found a gym membership for $20 a month so they could shower and use the bathrooms. He got a post office box so Lily's school wouldn't know they were homeless. During the day, while Lily was in class, David slept in parking lots between jobs. At night, they would park behind a 24-hour diner where the staff didn't mind them being there. Lily was a trooper about the whole thing. She never complained. Even when they had to eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row, she would do her homework by the dim overhead light in the truck, and David would help her with math problems while they sat in fast food restaurant parking lots, using their Wi-Fi. She even said it felt like camping, which broke David's heart because he knew she was trying to make him feel better. The hardest part was watching other kids get picked up by their parents in nice cars, while he pulled up in his dented truck with their belongings visible in the back. He saw the looks from other parents, the whispered conversations, the way some of them pulled their children a little closer when Lily approached. He wanted to tell them that he was a good father, that he was doing his best, that losing everything didn't make him dangerous. But pride kept him quiet. Work became his escape and his curse at the same time. David was good at construction work. He had steady hands and could follow blueprints better than most. But the physical demands were taking their toll. Sleeping in a truck wasn't exactly restful, and he was often stiff and sore in the mornings. He started making small mistakes, nothing dangerous, but enough that his supervisor had noticed. David couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the only thing standing between them and complete disaster. The other workers didn't know about his situation. To them, he was just quiet David who kept to himself and always volunteered for overtime. They assumed he was saving money for something big, maybe a new house or a vacation. David let them think whatever they wanted. The truth was too complicated and too embarrassing to explain. On this particular Tuesday evening, David was especially tired. It had been raining all day, which meant the job site was muddy and slippery. Everything took twice as long in the rain, and his clothes were soaked through. He had $47 in his wallet, enough for gas and maybe some groceries if he was careful. Lily's school had sent home a note about a field trip that cost $25. He wanted her to go, to feel normal, but $25 might as well have been $2,500. As he drove through the back roads toward the diner where they would spend another night, David thought about calling his brother in the next state. Tom had offered to help, but taking charity from family felt like admitting defeat. David had always been the responsible one, the one who had his life together. Now he was homeless and struggling to feed his daughter. The shame was almost worse than the hunger. The rain was getting heavier and David had to slow down because his windshield wipers were old and streaky. The road was dark and winding, with no streetlights for miles. He was thinking about whether to stop for gas now or wait until morning when he saw something that would change his life forever. Through the rain and darkness, he spotted what looked like car lights pointing in the wrong direction, too low to be on the road. Someone was in trouble. David slowed his truck down and squinted through the rain-soaked windshield. Those lights definitely weren't supposed to be there. They were pointing up toward the sky instead of down the road, and they were coming from what looked like a deep ditch on the side of the highway. His first instinct was to keep driving. He had his own problems, and getting involved in someone else's trouble was the last thing he needed right now. But something made him pull over. Maybe it was the thought of Lily sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, trusting him to always do the right thing. Maybe it was remembering how alone he felt when his own world fell apart, and how desperately he had wished someone would help. Whatever it was, David couldn't just drive past. He gently shook Lily awake. "Hey, sweetheart, I need you to stay in the truck for a few minutes, okay? Lock the doors and don't get out no matter what. I'll be right back." Lily rubbed her eyes and nodded, still half asleep. David grabbed the small flashlight from his glove compartment and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like cold needles, soaking through his work shirt in seconds. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him as he made his way toward the ditch. The grass was slippery under his boots, and he had to be careful not to slide down the embankment himself. As he got closer, the beam of his flashlight revealed the full extent of what had happened. A small blue sedan was flipped completely upside down, its roof crushed against the muddy bottom of the ditch. Steam was rising from the engine, and David could smell something that might have been gas or oil. The car looked like it had rolled several times before landing in this position. David's heart started racing. If anyone was inside that car, they were in serious trouble. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone in there? Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain pounding on metal. Then he heard it, a small voice, barely audible over the storm. It sounded like a child crying. David scrambled down the muddy slope, his boots sliding and his hands grabbing at anything to keep from falling. When he reached the car, he got down on his knees and shined his light through the passenger window. What he saw made his stomach drop. A woman was hanging upside down in the driver's seat, held in place by her seatbelt. Her dark hair was matted with blood and her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. In the back seat, also hanging upside down, was a little boy who looked to be about 5 years old. He was crying and trying to reach for his mother, but his own seatbelt was keeping him trapped. "It's okay, buddy," David called through the glass. "I'm here to help. What's your name?" The little boy looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Alex," he whispered. "Is my mommy okay?" "She won't wake up." David's mind was racing. The car was upside down and potentially unstable. There might be gas leaking. The woman was unconscious and bleeding, which meant she could have a serious head injury. The child seemed alert but was obviously scared and might be hurt too. David had no medical training, no proper tools, and no way to call for help since his phone had no signal out here. He tried the passenger door, but it was jammed. The driver's side was pressed into the mud. The back door on Alex's side was his best option, but it took several tries before David could force it open. The metal groaned and complained, and David worried that moving the car too much might make it shift or collapse further. "Alex, I'm going to get you out first, okay? Then we'll help your mommy," David said, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. The truth was, he wasn't sure the woman was still alive. She had lost a lot of blood, and the way she was hanging there so still and lifeless scared him. Getting Alex out was harder than David expected. The boy was hanging upside down, and David had to support his weight while figuring out how to release the seatbelt without dropping him. His hands were shaking, partly from the cold rain and partly from pure adrenaline. Finally, he managed to lift Alex up and carry him out of the wreckage. "Are you hurt anywhere?" David asked, checking the boy over quickly. Alex had some scratches and bruises, but nothing that looked serious. He was shivering, though, and David realized the child was only wearing a thin sweater and jeans. "I want my mommy," Alex said, tears streaming down his dirty face. "I know, buddy. I'm going to get her out, too." David took off his work jacket and wrapped it around Alex. "I need you to be very brave for me, okay? Can you climb up to that truck you see up there with the lights on? There's a little girl inside named Lily. You'll be safe and warm in there while I help your mommy." Alex looked uncertain, but David helped him climb up the muddy slope to the road. Through the truck window, David could see Lily's concerned face. He opened the door and gently pushed Alex inside. "Lily, this is Alex. He's going to sit with you for a few minutes while I help his mom, okay? Keep him warm." Lily immediately scooted over and put her arm around the scared little boy, sharing her blanket with him. Getting back to the car, David knew he was running out of time. The woman, Alex had called her mommy, but David didn't know her name, was still unconscious. He managed to get the driver's door partially open by digging some of the mud away with his hands. But getting her out safely was going to be nearly impossible alone. David had to make a decision. He could leave Alex and the woman here while he drove to find help, but that could take an hour or more in this weather, and the woman might not have that long. Or he could try to get her out himself, risk injuring her further but get her to a hospital faster. Looking at her pale face and the blood in her hair, David knew waiting wasn't an option. He carefully supported her head and neck as best he could while working to free her from the seatbelt. She was heavier than he expected, and the awkward angle made everything more difficult. It took what felt like forever, but finally he managed to pull her free from the wreckage. Carrying an unconscious woman up a muddy slope in the pouring rain, while trying not to hurt her further, was the hardest thing David had ever done. By the time he reached his truck, he was exhausted and covered in mud, but she was breathing. That had to count for something. He laid her as gently as possible in the truck bed, using some old blankets to try to keep her dry and warm. Alex was crying again, seeing his mother like that, and Lily was trying to comfort him even though she looked scared herself. David climbed into the driver's seat, his hands still shaking. His phone still had no signal, and the nearest hospital was 20 miles away through winding mountain roads in a storm, but he had no choice. 3 lives were now depending on him, and for the first time in months, David felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever. David's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white as he navigated the winding mountain roads through the storm. Every few seconds, he glanced in the rearview mirror to check on the woman lying in the truck bed. She hadn't moved since he pulled her from the wreckage, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. In the passenger seat, Lily was holding Alex close, whispering soft words to comfort him. The little boy kept asking if his mommy was going to be okay, and Lily, wise beyond her 8 years, kept telling him that everything would be fine. David prayed she was right. When they finally reached the county hospital, David pulled up to the emergency entrance and started honking his horn. Within minutes, medical staff were rushing out with a stretcher. David watched as they carefully moved the unconscious woman from his truck bed, Alex crying and trying to follow her as they wheeled her inside. "Sir, are you family?" a nurse asked David as they stood in the bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area. "No, I just found them. Their car flipped over in a ditch about 20 miles back," David explained, suddenly aware of how he must look, covered in mud, soaking wet, with a scared little boy clinging to his side. "And this is her son?" The nurse looked down at Alex, who was still wrapped in David's work jacket. "Yes, his name is Alex, that's all I know." The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, questions, and waiting. David learned that the woman, the hospital staff called her Jane Doe since she had no identification, had suffered a serious concussion and some internal bleeding, but she was stable. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Alex had been checked over too and miraculously had only minor cuts and bruises. But when the doctors tried to ask him questions about his family, where they lived or what his last name was, the little boy just shook his head. He was too traumatized to give them any useful information. By morning, a social worker named Mrs. Peterson arrived. She was a kind woman in her 50s, but David could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She'd probably been dealing with cases like this for years. "The woman is awake now, but she's having some memory issues," Mrs. Peterson explained to David as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. Alex was coloring at the next table over, finally calm enough to focus on something besides his mother. She remembers her first name is Christine, and she knows Alex is her son, but everything else is fuzzy. The doctors say it's not uncommon with head injuries. David nodded, sipping the bitter hospital coffee. He'd been awake for over 24 hours straight, but he couldn't leave until he knew Alex and Christine would be okay. The problem is, without any identification or family contacts, I'm going to have to place Alex in temporary foster care until his mother recovers and we can sort this out. Mrs. Peterson continued. It might take weeks. David looked over at Alex, who was drawing what looked like a car upside down in red crayon. The sight made his heart ache. This little boy had just been through the most terrifying experience of his life, and now they wanted to take him away from the only familiar face he had left. What if someone else wanted to take care of him? David heard himself asking before he'd really thought it through. Mrs. Peterson raised her eyebrows. Are you a relative? No, but David struggled to find the right words. He's been through enough. He trusts me and my daughter. Maybe he could stay with us until his mom gets better. Mr. Johnson, I appreciate what you did for them, I really do. But fostering requires background checks, home visits, proper facilities, and she trailed off, probably noticing David's worn-out clothes and the fact that he'd been living out of his truck. David felt his face burn with embarrassment. Of course they wouldn't let a homeless man take care of someone else's child. He could barely take care of his own daughter. But then something unexpected happened. Christine appeared in the cafeteria doorway, moving slowly with a nurse's help. She was pale and had a large bandage on her head, but she was conscious and walking. Alex jumped up and ran to her, and David watched as she hugged her son with tears streaming down her face. After Christine had settled at their table and heard about the foster care situation, she looked directly at David. Her eyes were clearer now, though still confused. You saved our lives, she said simply. If Alex trusts you, then so do I. Please, if there's any way he could stay with you until I'm better, I would be so grateful. Mrs. Peterson looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I understand your feelings, but there are procedures we have to follow. What if it was temporary? David asked. Just a few days until she's released and can remember more about her family? I'll bring him to visit every day. You can check on us whenever you want. It took hours of discussion, phone calls, and paperwork, but somehow Mrs. Peterson made it work. Maybe it was because the foster care system was overwhelmed. Or maybe she could see how much Alex had bonded with David and Lily. Either way, Alex would be staying with them for at least a week while Christine recovered and they tried to figure out who she really was. Leaving the hospital that evening, David felt a strange mix of emotions. He'd gone from being a single father struggling to survive to being responsible for another child who'd been through trauma. Alex walked between David and Lily, holding both their hands, his small backpack containing the few belongings the hospital had given him. Where do we live? Alex asked as they approached David's truck. David and Lily exchanged glances. They hadn't had a chance to explain their living situation to Alex yet. How do you tell a 5-year-old who just lost everything that you're all homeless? Well, Lily said, always the problem solver. We're kind of camping right now. It's like an adventure. That first night was harder than David had expected. His truck bench seat could fit 3 people, but barely. Alex curled up between David and Lily, occasionally crying softly for his mother. David found himself staying awake long into the night, listening to make sure both children were breathing safe and warm. The next morning, David faced a new challenge. He couldn't bring Alex to the construction site like he sometimes did with Lily. A 5-year-old needed constant supervision. David called his supervisor and explained that he had a family emergency and needed a few days off. It was unpaid time, which meant no money coming in, but David couldn't see any other option. They spent the day at the hospital visiting Christine. Her memory was slowly coming back in pieces, but she still couldn't remember where they lived or any phone numbers for family. She did remember that Alex loved dinosaurs and that his favorite food was grilled cheese sandwiches, small details. But they helped David understand how to care for him. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mornings at the hospital with Christine, afternoons at the public library where the kids could play and David could use the computers to look for work that might accommodate his new situation. Evenings were spent in parking lots, sharing fast food meals and telling stories to help Alex fall asleep. David watched as Lily stepped into a big sister role with Alex, teaching him games and sharing her few toys. Alex, for his part, began to smile again, though he still asked for his mommy every night. The three of them became an unlikely family, bound together by circumstances none of them had chosen, but all of them were learning to navigate together. David knew this arrangement couldn't last forever. Eventually, Christine would remember who she was, or her family would find them, or the authorities would decide this wasn't working. But for now, they had each other, and that felt like enough. By the fourth day, David was starting to notice things that didn't quite add up. Christine's memory was definitely improving. She could remember more details about Alex's daily routines, his favorite songs, even specific conversations they'd had before the accident. But whenever David or the hospital staff asked about their home, their family, or how to contact anyone who might be looking for them, Christine would get a distant look in her eyes and claim she just couldn't remember. It was during one of their afternoon visits that David first really paid attention to how Christine spoke. She was explaining to Alex why he needed to eat his hospital lunch, and David noticed her vocabulary was different from most people he knew. She used words like nutritious and essential nutrients instead of just saying, "It's good for you." When she talked to the doctors, she seemed to understand their medical terms without them having to explain anything. "Were you a nurse or something?" David asked her one day as they sat in Christine's hospital room while Alex napped in the chair. Christine paused for a moment, her hand freezing while she was brushing her hair. I don't think so. I mean, I don't remember being a nurse." But the way she said it made David feel like she was holding something back. That same afternoon, David noticed something else strange. Alex had been carrying a small dinosaur toy since the accident, something the nurses had found in the wreckage. David had assumed it was just a regular kid's toy, but when he looked at it more closely, he saw a small tag on the bottom. It was from an expensive toy store in the city, the kind of place David had walked past with Lily but never gone into, because everything cost more than his weekly grocery budget. When they got back to the truck that evening, David started really looking at Alex's clothes for the first time. The little boy's jeans weren't the cheap kind from discount stores. They were a brand David recognized from seeing them advertised during football games. His sneakers were name brand too, and they looked almost new despite everything he'd been through. "Alex," David said gently as they settled in for the night, "do you remember your house? Was it big or small?" Alex thought for a moment, then spread his arms wide. "Really big. And we had a swimming pool in the backyard, and a big kitchen where Mommy made pancakes on Sunday mornings." Lily's eyes went wide. "You had your own swimming pool?" David felt a knot forming in his stomach. People with swimming pools and expensive clothes didn't usually end up in car accidents on remote mountain roads with no identification. Something wasn't right here. The next day, Christine was being discharged from the hospital. The doctors said she was physically ready to leave, though they recommended she follow up with a specialist about her memory issues. Mrs. Peterson had arranged for them to stay in a small motel room for a few more days while they continued trying to locate Christine's family. David used the last of his emergency money to pay for the motel room, telling himself it was worth it to give the kids a real bed and a shower. But as he watched Christine settle into the room, he noticed more things that seemed off. She immediately went to the bathroom and started organizing the toiletries the hospital had given her in a very particular way. She folded the towels with perfect corners like someone who was used to having things just so. When David brought back fast food for dinner, Christine looked at it like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "Is everything okay?" David asked. "Oh yes, this is fine," Christine said quickly. But David watched as she carefully removed the pickles from her burger and used a napkin to wipe off the sauce. She ate slowly like she wasn't used to this kind of food. That night, David lay awake on the motel room floor while Christine and Alex shared one bed and Lily took the other. He stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Christine was clearly educated and came from money. Alex's clothes and toys were expensive. They had a house with a swimming pool. So what were they doing driving alone on a back road in the middle of a storm with no identification? The answer that kept coming to David's mind was one he didn't want to think about. Maybe they weren't victims of a random accident. Maybe they were running from something. The next morning confirmed David's suspicions. They were walking to the hospital for Christine's follow-up appointment when a police car drove past with its sirens on, probably heading to some unrelated emergency. Christine grabbed Alex's hand so tightly that the little boy yelped and David saw real fear flash across her face. "Are you okay?" David asked. I'm fine, Christine said, but her voice was shaky. It's just, loud sirens make me nervous since the accident. But David had been watching her carefully, and her reaction started before the sirens got loud. She had tensed up the moment she saw the police car, before she could have heard anything. At the hospital, David stepped out to get coffee while Christine was meeting with the doctor. When he came back, he overheard part of their conversation through the partially open door. Have you contacted your family yet? The doctor was asking. I'm still having trouble remembering phone numbers and addresses, Christine replied, but I'm sure it will come back to me soon. What about your work? Surely your employer would be looking for you by now. There was a long pause. I work from home mostly. Freelance work. People probably just think I'm busy with a project. David frowned. Earlier, Christine had told him she couldn't remember what kind of work she did. Now she was saying she did freelance work from home. The stories weren't matching up. That afternoon, David decided to test something. While they were sitting in the motel room, he casually mentioned that he'd heard on the news about some missing persons cases in the area. Oh, really? Christine said, but David noticed her body language change immediately. She sat up straighter and her hand started fidgeting with the hospital bracelet she still wore. Yeah, the police are asking anyone with information to call in. David continued, watching her face carefully. They're especially concerned about a woman and child who disappeared about a week ago. Christine went very pale. That's terrible. I hope they find them safe. Maybe we should call the police station, David suggested, just to let them know that you and Alex are safe in case anyone is looking for you. No, Christine said quickly, then caught herself. I mean, I don't think that's necessary. When my memory comes back fully, I'll contact my family myself. I wouldn't want to worry them by having the police call. But David could see that she was worried. Her hands were actually shaking now, and she kept glancing toward the motel room window like she expected someone to be watching. That evening, while Christine was giving Alex a bath, David stepped outside to throw away their dinner trash. As he walked past the window, he could hear Christine talking to Alex in a low voice. Remember what Mommy told you? She was saying. We don't tell anyone our real names or where we used to live, okay? It's like a game we're playing. David's blood went cold. This wasn't memory loss from a head injury. Christine was deliberately hiding their identity, and she was teaching Alex to lie about who they were. But why? What were they running from that was so bad that a mother would rather live as homeless strangers than reveal who they really were? As David stood outside that motel room looking up at the stars and trying to process what he'd just heard, he realized that saving Christine and Alex from that car wreck might have been just the beginning. Whatever they were really running from, it was still out there, and now David and Lily were part of whatever dangerous game Christine was playing. The question was, were they helping victims escape from something terrible? Or had David accidentally gotten his daughter involved in something that could put them all in danger? David barely slept that night. Every time he started to drift off, he'd think about what he'd overheard Christine telling Alex, and his eyes would snap open again. By morning, he'd made a decision. He was going to confront Christine and ask her directly what was really going on. If she was in some kind of trouble, maybe he could help. If she was putting his daughter in danger, he needed to know. But before David could say anything, there was a knock at the motel room door. David's heart immediately started racing. Nobody knew they were staying here except Mrs. Peterson from social services, and she wasn't supposed to check on them until later in the week. Through the thin curtains, David could see two figures standing outside, and one of them was definitely wearing a uniform. Police, came a voice from outside. We'd like to speak with Christine Wilson and her son Alex. David looked at Christine, who had gone completely white. Alex was sitting on the bed playing with his dinosaur toy, not understanding what was happening. Lily looked confused and scared. What do we do? David whispered to Christine, but Christine wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the door like it was about to explode. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely speak. They found us, she whispered. He found us, who found you? David asked, but Christine just shook her head, tears starting to stream down her face. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Ma'am, we know you're in there. We just want to talk. David looked at Lily and Alex, both children watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes. Whatever was happening, he couldn't let the kids be scared. He walked to the door and slowly opened it, keeping the chain lock attached. Two police officers stood outside, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a younger woman with kind eyes. They didn't look angry or threatening, just tired. "Are you David Johnson?" the male officer asked. "Yes, sir." "My name is Detective Roberts, and this is Officer Martinez. We've been looking for Ms. Wilson and her son for over a week now. May we come in?" David's mind was racing. Christine was terrified. The police had been looking for them, and he was standing in the middle of whatever this was with his 8-year-old daughter. He had no choice but to let them in. When the officers entered the room, Christine was sitting on the edge of the bed holding Alex protectively. She looked like she was expecting the worst news of her life. "Ma'am," Detective Roberts said gently. "First, let me say how relieved we are to find you and Alex safe. Your family has been worried sick." Christine looked up sharply. "My family? Your parents flew in from Denver 3 days ago. Your sister has been calling our station every few hours. The entire pediatric surgery team at Metropolitan Hospital has been looking for you." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Pediatric surgery?" Officer Martinez smiled at David. "Mr. Johnson, do you know who you rescued? This is Dr. Christine Reynolds, one of the best pediatric surgeons on the East Coast. She's saved hundreds of children's lives." David stared at Christine, Dr. Reynolds, in shock. A doctor, a surgeon. That explained the expensive clothes, the big house with the swimming pool, the way she spoke, her understanding of medical terms. But it didn't explain why she'd been so afraid or why she'd been hiding her identity. "I don't understand," David said. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? The hospital, social services, me. We've all been trying to help you find your family." Dr. Reynolds was crying now, but they seemed like tears of relief rather than fear. "Because I was so scared he would find us first," she said quietly. "Who?" Detective Roberts asked, sitting down across from her. "My ex-husband, Robert, Alex's father." Dr. Reynolds pulled Alex closer to her. "He took us from our home 8 days ago. He said if I ever tried to leave him again, he would make sure I never saw Alex again. He's been following us, threatening us for months since the divorce was finalized." David felt sick. "He kidnapped you?" "Robert has been escalating his threats for weeks," Dr. Reynolds continued. "He broke into my house, followed me to work, sent threatening messages. I got a restraining order, but that just made him angrier. Last Tuesday, he was waiting in my garage when I got home from the hospital. He had a gun." Officer Martinez was taking notes. "Where has he been keeping you?" "A cabin about 40 miles north of here. He said he was taking us somewhere where nobody would ever find us. But on Saturday night, he had to go into town for supplies and he made a mistake. He handcuffed me to a pipe in the basement, but the pipe was old and rusty. I managed to break free." Dr. Reynolds looked down at Alex, who was listening quietly. "I grabbed Alex and we ran to Robert's car. I've never been so scared in my life. I didn't know these mountain roads. It was dark and raining. And I knew if he caught us." She shuddered. "That's when you crashed," David said, finally understanding. "I was driving too fast, trying to get away. When I saw headlights behind us, I thought it was Robert coming after us. I panicked and lost control of the car." Dr. Reynolds looked at David with tears in her eyes. "If you hadn't found us, if you hadn't helped us, I don't know what would have happened." Detective Roberts leaned forward. "Ma'am, I have some good news for you. We arrested Robert yesterday morning. He's been charged with kidnapping, assault, and violation of a restraining order. He's not going to hurt you or Alex again." David watched as the tension seemed to leave Dr. Reynolds' body all at once. She started crying harder, but now David could see it was pure relief. "The amnesia," David said, "that wasn't real, was it?" "It was partly real," Dr. Reynolds admitted. "The head injury did affect my memory for the first day or two. But after that, I remembered everything. I just didn't know if it was safe to tell anyone who I really was. I was so afraid that somehow Robert would find out where we were." Officer Martinez stood up. "We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement, but there's no rush. Take some time to process all this." As the officers prepared to leave, Detective Roberts turned to David. "Mr. Johnson, what you did took real courage. Most people would have just called 911 and kept driving. You saved 2 lives and you've been taking care of them ever since, even though you barely know them." After the police left, the motel room was quiet for a long time. Alex was playing again, just happy to have his mother safe. Lily was asking David whispered questions about what had happened. And David was trying to wrap his head around the fact that the woman he'd been sharing fast food with for the past week was actually a successful doctor. "David," Dr. Reynolds said finally, "I can never repay what you've done for us. You gave us safety when we had nowhere else to go. You shared what little you had even though you didn't know who we were. Anyone would have done the same thing, David said, but Dr. Reynolds shook her head. No, they wouldn't have, and now I want to do something for you. She paused, looking around the small motel room. I know you've been struggling. I can see it. And Lily mentioned that you've been living in your truck. That ends now. Over the next hour, Dr. Reynolds made several phone calls. By the time she was done, David had a job interview scheduled at the hospital where she worked. Not as a doctor, obviously, but as part of the maintenance crew. It was steady work with good benefits and health insurance for both him and Lily. It's not charity, Dr. Reynolds insisted when David tried to protest. The hospital needs good people, and you've proven you're someone who can be trusted in a crisis. 2 weeks later, David was starting his new job. Dr. Reynolds had also helped him find an affordable apartment near the hospital, and even connected him with a good lawyer who helped him get full custody when his ex-wife suddenly reappeared claiming she wanted Lily back. The four of them, David, Lily, Dr. Reynolds, and Alex, became an unlikely family of friends. They had Sunday dinners together, the kids had play dates, and David often reflected on how strange life could be. 6 months ago, he'd been a struggling single father with no hope and no future. Now he had a good job, a safe home for Lily, and friends who felt like family. Sometimes, David thought, helping other people really is the best way to help yourself. He'd stopped his truck that rainy night thinking he was saving someone else, but in the end, Dr. Reynolds and Alex had saved him too.